Penn Dotson is an employment law attorney in New York who recovers unpaid and underpaid wages for hard-working employees. She represents individuals, collectives, and classes of workers in wage and hour law cases, primarily in greater New York City. Penn received her BA from Dartmouth College and her JD from University of California, Hastings College of Law. Penn is the former president of the National Employment Lawyers Association and has been named a super lawyer in employment law for the New York metro region. And now for Glenn Malia. Glenn is a real estate law attorney. However, just recently, Glenn transformed his firm into a niche practice focused on helping small business owners and landlords in particular to solve problems, protect their assets, and make more money. Glenn Malia is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and Brooklyn Law School and has been practicing law since 1984. His firm, Malia Law, is located in Cortlandt Manor, New York. So with that, I'll hand the reins over to LexisNexis Senior Director, Loretta Rupert, to kick off the presentation portion of the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate everyone coming today to this particular session. As you'll see on the screen, the one thing that you'll definitely learn today from two practicing attorneys who are running their law firm like a business is that it is a small business. We're really going to be covering on how to build a successful law firm. And there's definitely a method to making effective decisions and how that works. So unfortunately for the vast majority of the attorneys, running a law firm business wasn't covered in law. And wearing a lot of hats is tough. And solos can find themselves at the end of a long day wondering where their time went and wondering about what didn't get done and why they aren't more successful. Not prioritizing or running their business or having the proper tools to do so can often be hidden reasons. This panel discussion features a couple of solo and small firm attorneys, as Kelly had introduced, Penn and Glenn, who's going to share best practices on how to build a successful law practice and law firm business to include attaining happy clients, freeing yourself from the grind, and life outside of the office. The topics that we're going to be covering are processes, policies, procedures, and people, and what numbers to pay attention to that matter, and building a reputation for outside client service, and setting and attaining personal, fiscal, and professional goals. So with that, I'd like to get started with the first question, which we'll be addressing to Penn. Penn, from your experience, what are some of the considerations that you'd like to share for setting personal, fiscal, and professional goals?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me, and welcome to everybody joining us today. I think one thing about goal setting is that at first glance, the goal setting almost sounds like sort of a fluffy topic to start with. You know, most of us probably just want to get down to the nitty-gritty, and we will be covering some of those more specific issues later on in the presentation. But one of the biggest lessons to learn as a solo or small firm practitioner is that it requires an immense amount of discipline and effort to take yourself out of the daily grind and take a step back in order to set some of your goals and not just sort of get stuck in the weeds doing the day-to-day stuff. I mean, there's always that other motion to file or that client to call back or whatever it is that's burning on your plate, and it's really vital that we take that time to set these goals. We've divided it up into personal, financial, and professional goals because each of these requires separate consideration. In some ways, financial is the easiest way, is the easiest kind of goal setting to do because it is the most specific. You can compute a number that you want to achieve and then sort of reverse engineer that back to how many clients that means you need to get in the door and how many calls you need to make to get that many clients in the door. The other two, I think, warrant a little bit more discussion, and it's something that at least when I was starting my firm, I don't think got enough attention in some of the literature and other influences that are out there. It's really important that we set aside some time to define for ourselves what success means in each of these arenas. So personal would be, for some people, if you want to work 80 hours a week, go for it. If that's where you find your joy, that's perfectly fine. For others of us, that might not be a personal goal, and so part of your goal setting would be, as a firm practitioner, maybe I want to limit my work week to 40 hours a week. That sounds like pie in the sky for a lot of us, but that can be a very obtainable goal. It's just that you have to have that goal out there in order to set up your structures to meet those goals. And then the last one is professional goals. There are some lawyers that arrange their practice saying, you know, I'm going to take any kind of case that comes in the door that'll pay me money. I wouldn't exactly say that's a professional goal. That's sort of often what happens when we don't set goals. So is there a particular practice area that you feel passionate about? Like Glenn said, you know, he used to practice a broader range of things, and he found that by narrowing his practice area, that has brought him more success. Whatever your professional goals are, don't let those slip by the wayside, because otherwise lots of potential clients and other distractions will want to take your time away from you, and then suddenly you're getting caught back in the weeds. Like this says, we need to don't be afraid to define your success in your own way. And what I mean by that is, I think for a myriad reasons, there becomes a temptation to think about success largely in terms of the financial picture. But one of the great freedoms and goals about having a firm of your own is the ability to shape your life more than you might if you were working in a different environment. It brings incredible opportunities for quality of life and just structuring your life in ways that make you happy and fulfilled, and however you define that. And for some people, it may be you know, getting out there and spending more time with your family. If you have small children, you know, picking them up from school. I spoke with a lawyer who just recently went out on his own last week, and he was ecstatic that he could go and pick up his child a couple of times a week in ways that he wasn't able to with a firm. Not too long ago, I was talking to a court reporter who had just gotten back from Myanmar on a photography tour, and before long is about to go to Thailand to take her 80-year-old mother on an elephant ride. Obviously, court reporting is her day job, and she fuels her passions and her definitions of success in very particular ways. I thought that was an admirable thing, that some of us lawyers looked around at each other in the room as if taking off this kind of time were incomprehensible. But the important thing is, again, just don't be afraid to define success in your own way. Another point on this topic of defining goals is to make sure, especially as a solo practitioner, but no matter where you are in your practicing career, celebrate the milestones and the progress along the way. Sometimes, especially when you're starting out, the end goals or those distant goals of certain financial goals or whatever they may seem extremely distant. So don't be reluctant to acknowledge the many successes along the way. One very important thing today to do, I think, especially if you have employees or coworkers, but even if just for yourself, is every so often, I would say once a quarter, every 90 days, take a look back and just think about all the things that you've done to make your firm better than it was 3 months before. Sometimes in the ups and downs of firm life, it's important to have these little pats on the back for the progress that we've made along the way. So again, don't be afraid to do that. When my mother and her business partner started a company in the early 80s, one of the things they did in a completely different industry, but when they reached their first 100 clients, they celebrated somehow. I think one time the people that were going to deliver the systems, they rented a limousine for just as something celebratory, and it made a huge difference to morale, and it also builds a culture of success by not saying, you know, we're falling so short of our goals that we may hope to one day achieve, but you know, in the past 90 days we've brought on this many clients. In the past 6 months we've made this much money. In the past year, you know, we've created this great infrastructure that we can now rely on. Whatever your your milestones are. Make sure that you do you do celebrate those. And finally on this topic, make sure that you you always have in mind that your firm is there as a tool and a resource for you to reach your goals and to find your methods of success. To me, it's sort of like building a robot. You know, in the sci-fi movies, you have these ideas of building a robot to help you out to, I don't know, wash your dishes and vacuum your floor and all those kinds of things. And only in the bad, evil robots are the ones that take over and make the humans the slaves. So remember that when you're approaching your firm, it's always supposed to be the tool to empower you. If you find that your firm is running your life and that you're a slave to it, then that's immediately you have to do something to take a step back and apply the brakes and figure out what's going on so that you're the one in charge again and that it can be your tool. That would probably be one of those great times to reevaluate those personal, financial, and professional goals to make sure that you do have those goals and that you are making efforts in light of what those goals are. And another thing just on this point is you'll find that when you have these goals in your mind and these frameworks and you know what your ideals are in your mind, the little day-to-day decisions that you make, you sort of unintentionally frame those in light of what the bigger goals are, and then after a certain amount of time, sometimes it almost seems like magic that everything has suddenly come together and that you're accomplishing your goals, but it's because you've had this framework in your mind the whole time, and it just day-to-day you're making decisions that make that a reality.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Penn. Glenn, do you have anything that you'd like to add to setting personal, financial, and professional goals?
Yeah, just a couple of things specifically about the goals. You know, it's my belief the goals should be set really big. I've once heard it said that if you set a goal and it doesn't both scare you and excite you at the same time, then it's probably not a big enough goal. I mean, if your goal is to work only 40 weeks a year, only 40 hours a week, make that the goal and what to work towards. And then to carry on Penn's point about looking back every 90 days, at the same time, after you look back at your successes over the last 90 days towards your goal, you look forward to what are the next steps to take over the next 90 days. Because when you set the really big goals, you have to realize you're going to get to them step by step by step. You're not going to go from having a practice that's making $100,000 to having a practice making $1 million in 90 days. But you can get there if you set the goals step by step by step. And so every 90 days, after you look back to see, hey, what have been my successes over the last 90 days, look forward. Okay, what am I going to do over the next 90 days to get me towards my goals?
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I apologize if you hear some knocking in the background. We've got some folks working in our building here. So, Glenn, this next question is for you. You know, we often hear from solo and small law firms a burning question of why and when to bring people in to help. When is it a good time to do this, and is there a specific trigger or event that happens that makes it a good time?
Well, let's first look at why would we bring anybody in. I mean, I think we've all been through the stage as solo practitioners when we start our own practice to say, hey, I can do this myself. I got no clients. I can answer the phones. I can do the mail. I can run to the post office. I can do the banking. I can do everything myself. And, that's a legitimate thought process. So, but why do we bring people in? And the reason to bring people in is when you understand that someone working for you can make you more money than it costs you to pay that person. The reason to have employees is to make a profit. And when you have a receptionist answering your phone, yes, it's going to cost you a certain amount of money, whether it's a live person in your office or whether it's, a service like a Ruby, call Ruby or somebody like that. It's going to cost you money, but in the long run, it's going to make you money. Using the reception is the perfect example. Someone else answering your phones, it makes you money because, number one, when your phone rings, it gets answered without pulling you away from what you're doing. And number two is when your phone rings and somebody else answers it, it automatically elevates you in the eyes of that potential client that's calling or in the eyes of the attorney that's calling or the court clerk that's calling, because they now look at you as a legitimate business as opposed to just an attorney hanging out a shingle and doing all the work themselves. So the bring in person, you bring in people to make more money for you. My belief is you bring in someone right away. You don't have to have a live body in your office to be working for you. As I just made reference to call Ruby. There's virtual assistants that you can use to do functions for you, whether it's drafting papers or whether it's making court appearances for you. Example of something in fact I just did this recently with my landlord-tenant practice. I now have someone who goes and files the papers for me because the half hour, the 45 minutes, the hour that it takes to do that work, I can pay someone to do that for me for a lot less money than effectively it costs me to do it myself. So I believe you bring people in right away, whether it's someone who's in your office or not, to answer your phones, to do those little chores that are more profitable for you to pay someone to do than for you to do yourself. And the specific trigger is when you decide that, hey, I can pay someone $25 an hour to do something while I'm sitting in my office making $100, $200, $300, $400, or $500 an hour during that same period of time. That is the trigger when you decide, when you realize that I'm being penny wise, pound foolish to answer the phones myself. I'm being penny wise, pound foolish to go file those papers yourself. And it took me 30 years to realize that it was a lot more effective for me to pay someone to file papers for me than for me to file them myself. But that's the trigger. When you realize that it's cheaper to pay someone to do the work for you than what you could be making on your own, doing at the same period of time, that's the trigger that's going to cause you to realize, I need to bring someone in to do this work. When you find answering the phones, when you find your work's not getting done because you're answering the phones, there's a trigger.
Thank you so much, Glenn. And now, it's funny because you kind of alluded a little bit to this earlier, but you'll see some of the excuses up here on the screen. It says, it's just me in the office. Why should I pay someone else to do what I can do myself? I don't trust them to do it the way that I need done, so I'm going to do it myself. It's easier to do it myself. What's wrong with that? These are the kinds of common excuses that we actually have, actually obtained, from talking to solo and small law firms. What advice would you have for them?
Well, let me just say something about those excuses. I've used them all myself, and they are excuses. And you're never going to build a successful law firm if you're going to resort to excuses. When it's just you and yourself, why should you pay someone to do what you can do yourself? Because you're paying that person less money than you can earn in that same time period. Don't trust someone to do it, or if they can do it faster yourself. That was one of my big excuses for years. I'm only talking about for 30 years. Until you realize that, once again, the time you spend teaching someone how to do it can be better spent. Let me give you an example. Just the filing the papers, or having someone else filing papers for me. Yeah, I can do that myself. Why don't I do it myself? Because that half hour, that 45 minutes, that hour, that's going to cost me $25, $40, $50 out of my pocket. I could be doing something else. I could be spending that same period of time marketing to get more clients. I could spend that same period of time working on bringing in potential new clients, converting them to actual clients. I could spend that same period of time doing client work that's going to be paying me for more money. So basically, these excuses are just easy fallback options because, spending money for someone doing something you can do yourself, unless you look at it as it's costing me less to spend that money, is a scary thought. And when you're starting a practice and you're trying to keep your dollars spent down to the lowest amount possible, you don't always realize, you don't always believe, you don't always look at, okay, it's cheaper for me to do it. It's cheaper for me to have somebody else do it. And those are the excuses. I've used them. I think every solo out there has used them. And until you realize that, you as a lawyer, You're doing the work that only lawyers can do, and you're charging a lot more money than your receptionist is going to be paid, or that outsourced virtual assistant, or that paralegal, or the outsourced telephone answering company is going to be paid. You're going to, that will be the time that you stop using those excuses as cheaper.
Great, thank you. And I know that there's one other thing too that that a colleague of mine, Christopher Anderson, has said as well. I think that there's a real fear sometimes for solo and small law firms to understand saying, well, if I need to hire a receptionist, maybe I'll be paying, somewhere between $30,000 and $35,000 a year for someone to answer my phones and maybe do some light filing. I don't have that kind of money right now. And I think what people need to understand is you don't need the full amount right then, but you need to commit and have a couple of months saved up in order to be able to first, make sure that you can go through that first month. And that's one of the last bullets I think that you had here was defining processes and procedures, which Penn's going to be speaking about here shortly, is that, it really helps when you're hiring someone to make sure that there's a way for them to be able to come in and start being productive, to help them be successful, to help you be able to spend your time the way that you want to, whether it's on more high-value work, which, of course, as you had mentioned, marketing your firm is not something that you can really outsource. You can do a little bit of the outsourcing of marketing, but when it really comes to closing and really getting to understand what kind of clients you want to bring in, it's only something that you can usually do yourself. So those were all really great points, Glenn.
That's exactly right, Loretta. And I forgot to touch on that. Like when you bring in staff, when you hire someone, that is the importance of the policies and procedures. You have to define ahead of time what this person is going to do, what that person's job functions are, and things like that. And obviously you have to give the training, but every employee ultimately, if you do it right, with the policies and the procedures in place so that employee can do his or her job when you're not around, with what that employee is doing for you, ultimately every employee is going to make you money. And that's what it's all about when you're in business. The purpose of business is to make money. And when you bring in employees, it is scary. It's a thought process that, hey, I don't have this money to spend, but you're right. Loretta, you're right. If you have 3 or 4 months of money, you can see where you'll be able to pay that person for 3 or 4 months. By the time that the next 4th month rolls around, you will have the money to pay that employee.
Great, thank you. And Penn, do you have any additional advice that you'd like to provide when it comes to when to hire or not to hire someone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've learned this the hard way. Being an employment lawyer, I've listened to probably literally thousands of disgruntled employees who are upset for one reason or another. So I think more than anyone, I should be paranoid about hiring people, but I can't reiterate enough how vital this is. And also just with the resources that are available today, it is so easy to take those baby steps of outsourcing tasks incrementally. So I mean, we're talking about $50 to $100 a week to start. We're not talking about a huge amount for any one given task. I mean, if for some of you out there that are looking at your bank accounts and thinking, yeah, that might be nice one of these days, I'm telling you, just try it out in a little way and see what a difference it makes to your productivity and ultimately your bottom line. And like Loretta said, it doesn't take a $40,000 commitment or anything like that. We're talking about a very small amount of money and working your way up from there. That being said, when you do make the decision to hire somebody, make sure that you make your hiring process rigorous. Again, this is spoken as much from the business perspective as from the employment lawyer perspective. Ask hard questions, call the references, listen to your gut. A lot of solos will just sort of hire whoever happens to wander in the door first, and then wonder 3 months later why they're regretting it. Take the time there. It's better to expend your time and effort on the front end than having to clean up messes later. That being said, when you do make your mistakes, even though I represent workers on a daily basis who have told me all sorts of horror stories about being fired, one of my #1 pieces of advice to any business owner is to terminate early in the relationship when it's just apparent that things are not working out. A lot of times you see those red flags early on, but you just ignore them because you don't want to deal with it, or you have fears in various ways. But both for your business, for yourself, and even for the employee's sake, it's really important that you do go ahead and make the cut early and move onward and upward. One other thing is I think there may be a slight difference in how contingency fee practices and upfront fee practices structure their employee relationships. I do a contingency practice, and I think my quick and dirty advice for people just starting out on this front is whenever you get that first big hit, you may be tempted to pay all kinds of other things first. I would say that is when you make that decision to hire the person or to find another thing to outsource or something. It's when that first big case hits. I think it's in some ways easier, or should be easier, for those of you to structure the economics when you have your upfront fees, because it's a little bit more it's easier to figure out what the future is going to hold.
Thank you so much. Those were all really great points from both of you. I'd like to move on to the next question, Penn, and I know that this is directed to you. Why does a policy and procedure manual matter if it's just yourself, or if you just have yourself and maybe one employee?
Yeah, I think I got this topic because I'm sort of known for being obsessive about PMPs. I actually really like writing them, as strange as that may sound to a lot of people. And again, I think that I get this a lot from my practice of employment law. I've seen time and time again the work environments where there is a manual and where there's not a manual, and seeing just the level of coherence and competency relative to that kind of structure. I mean, another thing that I've come to learn over time is that employees really do love having the structure and predictability of these written policies and procedures. They know what to do, they know what's expected of them, and they can sort of measure themselves against that. It also forces us to, as owners of our businesses, to refine our practices and to commit them to paper. Sometimes that can be a bit of a daunting task. When you're doing things just sort of piecemeal every time, obviously that's a very inefficient way to do things. If you find that you're doing something over and over again, that's something that should become systematized. So one thing I wanted to delineate is the difference between what I call SOPs and then policies. So standard operating procedures are how you do stuff. So what's the right way in your firm to open the mail? What's the right way to answer the phone? What's the right way to set up a new complaint or pleading? What's the right way to open a file, close a file? All those kinds of things. Policies is more like your employee handbook. Those are the firm's stance on things. So for example, what are your leave time policies? Things like that. Also, and this is something that I have learned over time, is to differentiate between internal and external policies. Internal policies are things having to do with you and your firm. So, staff management issues of one form or fashion. The external policies are the policies that you communicate to your clients. This is something that very few people do, but can really make a huge difference. One thing that most people don't realize is that clients don't know how to be good clients until they're told how to be good clients. So if you are constantly annoyed by clients asking for status calls back, or similar recurring things keep cropping up for you, it may be because you haven't taken the time to educate them about what it means to be a good client in your practice. Set those expectations early on, not in a sort of authoritarian way, but in a way that just tells them what you expect. You expect prompt payment. You expect not to be called at 1 a.m. unless something is truly an emergency and it requires your attention right then, which is fairly unlikely. All those kinds of things. One of the questions that we get a lot is, in regards to the building blocks of systems. Policies and procedures are sort of like the machines in your factory. So, I mean, I analogize this to knitting because I'm a closet knitter somewhat. If you were to create a knitting company, you could either hire 50 folks to sit around in rocking chairs and knit sweaters, and at the end of the day, you'd have partial amounts of 50 sweaters that wouldn't even be worth selling yet. Or you could invest that same amount of money in a machine that can knit 50 sweaters a second, and you'll have lots of stuff to sell. A silly analogy, I admit, but at the end of the day, you got to have a machine to really put out the product in an efficient manner. This applies no less in a service industry like ours than it does to creating widgets, whatever those may be. You do need to have the policies and procedures are those systems from which you create your product. You still need people to install the machines and make sure they're oiled and to run quality control and all those kinds of things on them. But you've got to have those systems in place. And like I've already said, people respond really well to structure and consistency. It's sort of like being a parent when you have employees. They want to know what they're supposed to do, what's expected of them, how to do a good job. Most employees actually really want to do a good job. They just sometimes don't know what that means to you. So yeah, that's all I've got on that.
Great, thank you, Penn. Well, while we're on the topic then of policy and procedure manuals, what process and policy, if people don't have them today, they typically have these things in their head, they're not something that's actually documented. So what process and policy do you start with, and which one is the most important for people to start with?
Sure. I would say as a general proposition, it would be ideal if you can write a whole 100-page manual before you ever get started. Most of us don't have that luxury. But I would say start with your pain points. So I'll give you a couple of examples that these are not my primary ones, but they're examples of pain points that resulted in quick policies and procedures being created. The first one is in regards to potential new clients. I realized very soon after opening my firm, if not before, that I'm just a total sucker for people. Anybody who walks in my door, I want to try to help them out. I want to, in some way, solve their problems, which may be a good thing in some regards, but not necessarily a great thing for business. So immediately, even though at the time it was just me, I made myself a spreadsheet, and for every potential client that came in, I gave them a score from 1 to 5 on all kinds of things. Everything from did they show up on time, were they nice, were they, how much documentary evidence is available in their cases, how solid a legal claim is it, all those kinds of factors that go into what I defined a good client to be. I would rank them on these scales, and then at the end, Excel would tally for me whether they resulted in a cumulative score of 3.5 or above or not. If I did not get that score, I would not take their case. And that way it took that decision out of my own hands. Even though I was the one that created the policy, it took that day-to-day decision out of my hand about when to and when not to take a particular case. Another example is one time I had a client whose case had settled, but the money had not come in yet. It was being held up in court for various reasons. And she asked if the firm could just advance her settlement, or even at one point she was so desperate she wanted to just get a portion of it, and the firm could have the rest. That was her offer. For a million reasons, I thought that would be a really bad idea, and certainly not a precedent that I wanted to set. So she asked me for this in a voicemail, and before calling her back, I sat down on my computer and I wrote the policies and procedure, an SOP for no settlement advances. I clearly delineated it. And again, this is not something this was not the first request I'd ever heard along these lines. But so then once I had written my procedure on this, I called her back and said, I'm sorry, our firm has a very clear policy that there will be no advances on settlements made. And while I'm sure she would have preferred a different answer, she was perfectly okay with that. It does seem to give a certain amount of credibility in addition to everything else. And one thing I wanted to say is when you start, in regard to the questions of where you start, I would say one of my general practices, I don't like to do anything more than a couple of times. I get very annoyed when I have to repeat myself. So anytime that I've realized I've done the same thing twice, I just sort of make a note of it to myself. On the third time, that's when I go ahead and start writing a procedure for it. In some cases, you should get the person, not yourself. You know, if it's something that you've delegated, get somebody else to write that procedure for you. But anyway, third time, get the procedure written. Fourth time, go back and follow your own written procedure and make sure it makes sense. Fifth time, delegate it and get somebody else to do it. And then, of course, ask for feedback along the way to make sure that it makes sense to them, too. But, yeah, I would say just there are a lot of templates out there on the Internet and you know, from various resources. You can probably get some from your local bar or any number of colleagues or whatever. You know, there are plenty of resources to draw from, but as far as making those P&Ps your own, start with your pain points and then just start with those things that you notice in your day-to-day life should be systematized. You know, from I think some of the easy ones that are fairly ubiquitous and apply to most of us would be, what is our procedure for answering the phone? What is our procedure for opening mail, scanning it, whatever that may be? What's our procedure for opening a file, closing a file? You know, all those kinds of mechanical things. I think getting those written out and implemented, and however that makes sense in your firm, it definitely is one of the first steps to drastically improving your quality of life and the effectiveness of your firm. Yeah, and then finally, in regard to making sure that this is an organic and growing system. One thing is that employees, as much as they love structure and consistency, also like to give feedback. So if you make it known that there are opportunities for them to give constructive criticism about how to improve your policies, that's a great thing both for you and for the firm. Make sure that you have a procedure about how to amend your procedures, though, lest it become all willy-nilly, because the last thing that you want to do is have 3 different secretaries suggesting 3 different methods for improving things and each doing things their own way. That breaks down the procedures altogether. But for example, you could have an email equivalent of an inbox to have all the suggestions, and then maybe once a quarter you go through all those, have a meeting about it, and make a decision to amend the policy, and then make sure that that is clearly communicated to the staff how it's going to be changed. But again, this is something that should not cause alarm or fear if your coworkers and staff have ideas about how to improve it. This is a thing of great value that you should embrace and proactively embrace and encourage it so that it continues to evolve and get ever better.
Thank you, Penn. And Glenn, did you have anything that you'd like to add to this before we move on to our next question?
Yeah, no, I'd like to add a couple things, particularly about the policies. Ben talked about the external policies and how a client doesn't know how to be a good client until they're taught to be a good client. The other thing about good external policies and having communicated with the clients is that it makes your life easier. I mean, if your policy, like my policy, is you're only going to look and return emails at certain times of the day, and you tell that to the client at the outset, the client's not going to expect that you're going to be responding to his or her email immediately after they send it, and so you have a client who's not disgruntled because you didn't respond to his or her email right away. Plus, you're not feeling the burden of checking your email every 15 minutes, half hour, or whatever to see if any client sent you an email and you want to respond to. So by having the good external policies that you communicate to the clients, it makes your life so much easier, and it gives you the opportunity to devote time to doing client work as opposed to just putting out fires. And then I'm not sure if Penn really focused enough on this, but when you're dealing with the procedures and the internal policies and the procedures, Penn talked about when you have a bad employee, you try to get rid of them right away. But sometimes in small offices in particular, maybe you come in the office in a bad mood and the employee says something, and you start to say, boy, I'm getting tired of this employee. And then how do you analyze whether the person is doing his or her job? You analyze it by looking at, okay, what are the policies we have, the internal policies? Okay, is the employee getting to work on time? Are they doing what their job is? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? Fine, they're meeting all the internal policies. Okay, let's look at the procedures. Are they answering the phones the way they're supposed to be answering the phones? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? So the internal policies and procedures also make your life easier, because it gives you a point to evaluate your employees when you get those periods of time where you're just tired of the employee and maybe you're in a bad mood and you say, oh, I want to fire that person. You can sit back and look at, okay, are they doing the job or not? They're doing the job, fine. It must be something about me that has me wanting to fire that person because they're doing the job. So the policies and the procedures just make your life as a lawyer, as a business owner, easier.
Thank you. I think those were really great value adds there. So, Glenn, this next question is for you, and this is really around the key operations of a successful law firm. So, in that, would you share with us what you believe those key operations are?
Sure. But first we need to go back as to what I believe, how to define a successful law firm. And it'll be interesting because you'll see how this loops all the way back to what Penn talked about at the very opening. My definition of a successful law firm is a firm that meets the owner's professional, financial, and personal needs or goals. So we loop back. What are your professional, personal, and financial needs or goals? So you've got to set those at the very outset to determine, are you going, do you have a successful firm, and how do we set those goals? I mean, let's look at the personal goals. How many hours a week do you want to work? How many weeks a year do you want to work? What days do you want to take off, and things of that nature? Your financial goals. How much money do I want to make? Your professional goals. What area of law do I want to practice? What do I want to do? Do I want to practice door law, taking everything comes in, or do I want to practice in a niche area and things like that? And then once you've established what those goals are, then you can look at, how do I get to those goals? And when it comes to the financial goals in particular, it's really, really, really simple. If you look at any business, it's the same thing. It's get the client. How do you get the client? Second thing is getting paid and getting the work done. Getting the client, basically, in order to get the client, you have to have plans in place, as to what are we doing? Obviously, marketing, advertising are ways to get the client, but you also have to decide in your business what employee, what job is responsible for what. Now, many of us started out as chief cook and bottle washer in our business without realizing that every law firm basically has 6, 7, or 8 positions. You may wear the same hat. You may wear all the different hats, but every firm's got a receptionist, secretary, paralegal, associate attorney, office manager, bookkeeper, rainmaker, and owner. You may be wearing the same hat, but you've got to sit back, and this goes to almost creating the policies and procedures again. Who does what job? Someone calls the office whose job it is to do that, because in many respects your clients come in mostly from phone calls, let's say. Okay, what steps is that person supposed to take for bringing the client in? That's why you need job descriptions. Who does what? Who does what in the firm? Because you've got to get those clients in. The next step is what are you going to do to attract clients? That's sometimes referred to as lead generation. You have your marketing, you have your advertising. We all know what advertising is, but what steps are you going to be doing on marketing? I've always thought that marketing is like the umbrella on advertising. Advertising is one part of marketing. Other parts of marketing involve, getting to know people, the referral, getting people to refer clients to you and things of that nature. And so you have to do the advertising and the marketing to get the clients coming in. And then once that client contacts you, you have to convert that potential client to a paying client. Okay? That's getting the client. In order to convert that potential client to a paying client, you need procedures. What are you going to do when that client calls you? Are you just going to automatically schedule an appointment? Are you going to do something that get some information to evaluate? Are you going to schedule the appointment for tomorrow so you get the client in right away? Or are you going to schedule the appointment for a week out so that you can send something to the client? You can communicate with the client. You can show the client before they ever come into the office that you are the expert. You are the go-to guy. Are you going to be basically selling to that client so when they come into your office to meet with you, they're ready, willing, and able to actually hire you as opposed to coming in, using up your time, and then saying, well, thank you very much. I'm going to go talk to a couple of other attorneys, or I'll get back to you, or I got to talk to my husband about it, or I got to talk to my partner about it, and things of that nature. So lead generation without lead conversion is can be a big waste of time, because if you can't convert the potential new client to a paying client, that lead generation, the money you spent to get that potential new client is down the drain. And so you do need procedures for that. Once you get the client, let's get paid. You want to get paid before doing any work. I think every one of us that's on this phone call, I'm willing to bet dollars for donuts, has done work for a client and then not been paid. How do you get paid? Well, first of all, learn you get paid before you do the work, number one. But once again, who is responsible for making sure the payment is done? Who is responsible for making sure that the retainer agreement is signed by the client before you start doing work? That's also part of your policies and procedures and your job descriptions. Are you going to start working before you get full payment? Will you take partial payment, upfront payments? Will you take payments over time and things of that nature? That's where your policies and procedures come into place. As Penn said, she created a policy to make sure that she could tell a client, hey, it's not the policy of this firm to give the client the money in anticipation of the settlement. Well, same thing. It's not the policy of this firm to start work on any matter until we have a signed retainer agreement, until we have money and things of that nature. That's the policies and procedures. But you also want to make it easy for the client to pay you. I advocate, and this is something that's new. I started practicing law back in 1984. Nobody was allowed to accept credit cards and things of that nature. But you got to take credit cards. You've got to be willing you've got to understand how to use your attorney trust account. And I know many states are different in terms of the rules. I know, fortunately, being a New York attorney, we are pretty easy. The rules are, but, get the money up front. Get the retainer money up front from the client. Put in your attorney trust account if that's what your state requires. But that way you have the money. And then build in your retainer agreement with the client how you draw down that money, when you draw down that money. Build in your retainer agreement, what's sometimes referred to as an evergreen clause. Okay, you're going to give me $10,000 as a retainer. When that retainer amount gets down to $5,000, you got to replenish it back up to $10,000. So you've got to, work with the client, be willing to use the trust account, your trust account, know how to use your trust account in order to make, basically in order to have the money so the client doesn't stiff you. And you know what, believe it or not, some clients walk into the office and they have no cash. They have no credit card. Many practice areas are like that. I mean, maybe you take collateral. Maybe the client has a fully paid car that's worth $1,000. Maybe they have a boat you can put into storage or something of that nature. It sounds weird and something that's certainly outside the box for attorneys, but consider the concept of taking collateral from the client to make sure it gets paid. I mean, pawn shops do it when you think about it. We're not pawn shops, but it's the same concept. You want to make sure you get paid. So you got to make the payment. You got to work with the client. You got to make the payment opportunities easy with credit cards and maybe taking collateral from the client. And you've got to basically, make sure you have that money from the client before you do the work. Now, the third thing is getting the work done. And this is the section that trips up most lawyers. We do not always have to do the work. And much of the work our clients need doesn't have to be done by any attorney. Getting the work done goes back now to what we talked about earlier about when to bring in employees. If you can pay someone $50 an hour to draft paperwork for you, a paralegal, a trained legal secretary, not yet admitted attorney, law graduate. You can pay someone to get work done for you, and you're getting paid $100 by the client. You're putting $50 in your pocket. That's leverage. I mean, that's how every business in this world works. That the people working in the businesses get paid less than the amount of money they're bringing in for the business. But once again, now we go back. You have to have a job description. Whose job is it to do X? You have drafting papers. Is that the lawyer's job or is that the paralegal's job? You obviously going to court is something only the lawyer can do. But is that the associate attorney's job or is that the owner's job or you know, who's doing what? That goes back to the job description. It goes back to the policies and procedures. And then you also need to have procedures in place. Like, you know, Penn talked about opening a file, procedures in place, opening the file. Well, those procedures also help make sure that the work that needs to get done gets done. The procedure for opening the file, okay, you have the actual, you know, giving the file a name, you know, getting the file from the cabinet, giving the file a name and some sort of index number or whatever, making sure the paperwork's in there. But, you know, the procedures should also include, if you're in an area of law that has statutes of limitations, someone's got to figure out what the statute of limitations is, and then there's got to be someone to make sure everything gets done before the statute of limitations is up. Someone's got to make sure the paperwork gets prepared and signed and then out for service and filed with the court, and that's where the procedures come in. It's the irony of it all is everything we've talked about in this phone call all sort of wraps together, you know, to make sure that you get paid, get the clients get paid, and you get the work done. I think that's about it I have on that.
Yeah, I think that was really great. Thank you. And Penn, do you have anything to add to that at all?
No, in the interest of time, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So with that, I'd like to give you 5 takeaways here. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Peter Drucker, but he was a businessman who actually wrote business books years and years ago, but a lot of the things that he actually developed back then as principles are still applied to today. So I actually took the 5 principles of what he used for an effective leader and kind of switched them up a little bit to be the 5 principles of an effective law firm. And those are, you need to understand where your time is spent by all who works at the firm, billable and non-billable staff. And it does go back to job descriptions and really understanding where your staff is spending their time. If their job is to be non-billable so that you can be more billable or do the things that only you can do, then that's where they should be spending their time. Also knowing the difference between work and results. You can spend a lot of hours doing nothing, or you can actually spend a lot of hours really working on high quality type of level work and actually getting the results that you want to be able to meet your personal, professional, and financial goals. Also, you need to build on the strengths of the team. So, you know, don't dismiss sometimes when you have a staff. I think it kind of goes back to what Penn was saying. I think that employees really want to do well. I think people come in well-intentioned to, they want to please, they want to do their job well, they want to be successful, and you can help them doing that by making sure that there's some really good policies and procedures, that they understand what it is, that they're well-trained, but also to give them a little challenge sometimes. If they actually do something really well, make sure that they're in charge of whatever it is that they're doing really well for your firm. And then also sometimes concentrating on minor areas where performance makes a big impact. I think this kind of goes back to maybe a little bit of what both Glenn and Penn had said, and that is that sometimes you don't have to bite off everything. It's not like you have to start your firm with a 1,000-page policy and procedure manual or standard operating procedures. Really what you want to do is you start off with those things, the pain points. What's the biggest pain point that you have today? Work on that one piece and then keep making that, and each one kind of builds upon each other. So it's really a great process there. And then the last thing is knowing that effective decisions, they don't happen by accident. They actually, there's a system to it. And so everything that you have, there's a cause and effect for everything. So with that, I'd like to open up the panel for any questions and answers. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little panel with questions. You're more than welcome to ask questions there. And then for those people who are CLE, because it's going to the bottom of the hour, we're also providing the CLE code down below as well. So Kelly, are there any questions that we'd like to ask?
Yes. So the first question is, as to a business plan, as with any other types of businesses, do lawyers who go solo need to have a lower expectation of continued income coming in regularly?
Who would like to take that?
I'll start off. This is Penn. I'm a big believer in business plans. I mean, you can read a lot of advice on both sides of that. Before I made the jump, I made a very detailed one, and yes, I mean, for my practice area, I think this is very practice area specific and also caseload specific. But in my area of practice, I did my plan assuming that all of my cases would be contingency, and then I knew what the time frames would be for generally how long it takes for contingency cases to come to fruition. So just doing the easy math on that, I knew that there would be a pretty good dip for a certain amount of time. For other practice areas that that are more upfront fee-based or flat fee-based, I think that those are in a lot of ways more predictable. I think your bigger challenge there is getting people to the door and getting the people that are to the door to actually sign up and give you the money. And I think in my practice area, it seems like I almost have to fight people away and decide against them. And so those aren't necessarily my challenges, but there is a bigger lag time. So did I answer that question sufficiently?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. And are there other questions there?
Yes, thank you, Penn. The next question is, Glenn, what prompted you to narrow the scope of practice areas to the ones you focus on now?
Okay. First and foremost, I've even narrowed it more than what was announced at the beginning. Now I narrow it just on representing landlords, helping them make more money, protect their assets, and solve their problems. Frankly, I got involved in it. I've been practicing for almost 30 years, and I knew something was running awry. My program, my business. I got involved in a coaching program, and the first thing I was taught was narrow the niche to practice, And when you start thinking about the whole concept, the specialist, and unfortunately we lawyers can't call ourselves specialists, but the specialist always makes more money. The plastic surgeon makes more money than the general practitioner in the medical field. And not only did I want to niche my practice, but niche it as narrow as possible so it goes as deep as possible. And then using my plastic surgeon analogy, the plastic surgeon who does, but breast jobs makes a lot more money than the plastic surgeon who's just doing, work at the hospital to help crash victims and stuff like that on facial things. So the narrower you niche your practice, the more money you're going to make. And that's what caused me to narrow it. I was unhappy with practicing door law. So I found an area that I enjoyed doing, and I'm doing it now and making more money and happier.
That's wonderful. We're going to take one last question, and then for those folks who have asked questions that we can't get answers to, we're going to send them directly to the speakers. If you don't mind, speakers, that you'll get those questions answered for us. We'd appreciate that. So one last question, Kelly.
Okay. I am a solo and have limited time. Is my method of giving file work on 1-hour increments the best way to get through difficult claims that I just have not been able to get to?
I'm not sure I really understand the question, but I'll try the best that I can. For the way that I think, I would say if the question is what is the most effective way to outsource tasks, is it, especially when you have a lot of pressing deadlines, I would say that if you have to choose between which tasks to outsource at the lowest level first, that is the most administrative and sort of routine and mundane first, and then you will have more time yourself to pick up the additional slack. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that piecemealing out, if you're trying to get a brief written, if you're trying to outsource 2 hours of time here and 2 hours of time there to an associate attorney on contract, I would think that would be quite inefficient. I think that if you are in a position to outsource to an associate, that it should be project-based, not necessarily hourly-based, and then obviously in those kind of situations you'd want to circle back and make sure that that person is getting the work done efficiently and all those kinds of things.
Can I just quickly chime? Penn, I sort of interpret the question a little bit differently. I interpreted the question that the person is time pressured, and sometimes there's files that may need 4 or 5 hours of work, and they only have an hour to give to it at any point in time. And I would say if that's the case, then do it that way. But what I found when I was files I wasn't getting to, the file on the corner of the desk that you have to do, but you don't want to touch, and you can find other things you'd rather be doing in the office than that file, is to schedule an appointment for yourself that you're going to, it's just like a client coming in, but it's just a file. You're going to sit down for an hour. You're going to work on that file for an hour. That's the appointment time. Get done what you can get done, and then if it's not completed, you schedule another appointment a day or two later.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of questions that have come in, both Penn and Glenn, and I'm not sure what your schedules look like. If you have 5 more minutes, we'd just like to ask a couple of more questions because we still have just about everybody still on the call. No one's dropping. I think they all want to hear you speak about this, and we'd love to get a couple more questions answered. Do you have 5 more minutes?
Yeah,
I do.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Why don't you go ahead and ask the next question
Okay.
then?
What issues arise in renting shared office space, for example, where you have your own office but share a receptionist, copy equipment, conference rooms, etc.?
I'll be happy to speak on this one. This is something that especially in New York City and other urban environments where space is at a premium has become extremely common, and I think is incredible, and it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I mean, I have never found any sort of problems with any sort of confidentiality issues or anything like that. Everything is sort of structurally very clear that everybody has their own firms. There's, if that's ever in doubt, I would say certainly there are plenty of ways to erect walls, to make sure that everybody's clear about where those boundaries are. But overall, I would say that I would highly, highly, highly recommend using space sharing arrangements and any other kinds of sharing arrangements. In my particular community, it's only lawyers in our shared office space. We have multiple conference rooms. We have shared reception. We have shared copy room, mail room, all kinds of resources. And we also have an extremely active referral network, which touching more on Glenn's point, allows for us to each have our own specific niches, knowing that we can easily farm out the other things that come across our desk, and that more often than not, other things will come back across to our desks, and it all works out that way.
Great, and I know that there's also services out there. If it's not a formal lease that you have with another law firm, there's also companies out there such as Regis and Office Edge, things like that, that actually also have something similar where when you rent from them, you automatically get, you can also apply to get their receptionist, and you can use people on a hourly basis to help you out, paralegals, etc. So I know that that is actually another common thing that solo and small law firms are taking advantage of these days.
I actually rent out space in my office suite to other attorneys. And the only negative, I mean, obviously, you've got to be able to get along with the people, but the only negative, and it affects me as it affects the other attorneys, is that there's a generic phone answering that says, good morning or good afternoon, law offices. So, your name is not, my name is not out there every time my secretary answers the phone. So that is the only negative I see, and I've been in office shares where I've shared with other attorneys. I have that situation now where I'm actually renting to other attorneys, and so long as you can get along, as Penn said, there's a collegiality and there's a referral. One of the attorneys that does matrimonial, does family court work, I don't do it. I flip it over to him and things of that nature.
Great points.
Okay, and the last question that we have time for today is, what are some of the resources a new solo can use to develop internal and external policies and procedures for the legal profession?
That's yours, Penn.
I mean, mine, honestly, I've developed over the years. Some are proprietary from various sources, but I mean, I would start with your local bar. A lot of the state bars have law firm management sections and are more than willing to give you a template for policies and procedures. I would say that when I was developing my SOPs, I didn't actually find the templates to be horribly useful. I mean, sometimes they sort of get your mind going and give you some ideas for different ways to do things. but more often than not, you're going to have your way of doing things that you're used to, or that you've picked up organically over the years, and so you're going to rewrite them almost from scratch anyway. But yeah, I would say just start with the bar associations, and I know that there is, it may be out of date now, but there was a book by Mr. Foonberg. I'm forgetting his first name. Jay Foonberg, thank you. Yeah, and he had a lot of good templates in his book, but again, I haven't even looked at that in over a decade, but that's a good place to start for some things.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, and that does conclude today's webinar. So thank you, Penn and Glenn, for your expert advice today. For those of you that are still on the line, just a few quick things before we part ways. All attendees will receive an email within 1 week with a link to a recording of today's webinar, as well as the slides from the presentation. For those attendees seeking CLE credit, please watch for an email within the next 10 to 20 days from our LexisNexis CLE team with the CLE paperwork. You will, again, need to fill the paperwork out and send it back as instructed with the 2 participation codes. I believe Loretta has them up on the screen there. But once again, the first code is 86747, and the second code is 43442. So 86747 and 43442. And lastly, please don't forget to complete our survey at the end of the webinar. So that is all, and thank you all for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.